All right. Good afternoon, everybody. All right. We are here today for the Coalition's workshop that we're going to present this evening with Anthony Iaconelli as your presenter. What hopefully will happen is that Tony's going to present and that we will engage as he desires to do so during the course of the session. You can see behind me the title of today's workshop is The Holocaust and the Jewish State. We will do this as we normally do, which will be at approximately about 5:45, which is about an hour from now. We'll stop for a repast, and then I'll go for about a half an hour, and then we'll come back for the final 45 minutes in terms of the presentation. I'm sure you'll find this really interesting and different, and I look forward to Tony's presentation. With that, I give you Tony Iaconelli.
Thank you, folks, and welcome to St. Augustine Prep. If this is your first time here, just some real quick housekeeping. Restrooms are just to the left of the entrance here, so if you go out, make a left. The first door you come to will be the men's room. The ladies' room is one room down. Just so you're aware of that. There are bottles of water on the back table. If anyone would like to grab a bottle of water, please help yourself. As Mr. Furman said, the topic tonight is really the connection between the Holocaust and the State of Israel. And we happen to be discussing this at a pretty interesting time, if you're paying attention to the news, given the domestic political situation in Israel. And as someone who teaches the subject, I get, really kind of used to reading about the international political situation with regards to Israel, which is really what the focus of the Western media tends to be on. The situation with Jerusalem, the two-state solution argument, all of those things, the settlements, the Golan Heights, the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, the Sinai. But what's interesting this week, or in the last couple of weeks, has been the domestic situation. And if you're unsure of what we're talking about, the not new Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, has kind of tried to move ahead with a judicial reform plan, which basically, if it goes through, would allow the Israeli parliament to kind of override the Israeli Supreme Court. And it was basically with a one vote majority in the Knesset, you could effectively override a Supreme Court decision. That has brought out, tremendous numbers of people in terms of protests. Tel Aviv has been extremely active. Other major cities protesting that decision, and it's actually forced Netanyahu to kind of postpone it to see where that goes. So we happen to be doing this at an interesting time. I'm going to try to take you through the history of Israel quickly, because it's a long history, and then try to get a consensus on what impact the Holocaust had on the creation of the State of Israel. Please understand going in, I am not going to make the argument that the Holocaust caused the creation of the State of Israel, okay? I am only going to try to bring to your attention the connection with the rise and development of the Israeli state that the Holocaust played a significant role in. So with that, let's see if we can get this going. All right, so the first thing I'd like to look at is the claims to the land, because obviously not only does the world Jewish community have a claim to the land, but the Arab nation states believe that they too have a legitimate claim to the land. And obviously that is the international controversy that has existed well before the modern state of Israel was created and continues to exist to this day. And we'll have to see if we can agree on a resolution to that issue. But these are the basic four claims that the international Jewish community has made with regards to the land of Israel or Palestine. One, that God promised the land to Abraham. This is the first covenant. This is the Old Testament. This is the Torah. This is the classic argument with regards to Israel. The second argument, that the Jewish people settled and developed the land. All right, so this is in the earliest stages of the Jewish faith, the settlement of the land. The third point says the international community granted political sovereignty in Palestine to the Jewish people. This is a reference to the Balfour Declaration that occurs towards the end of World War I, in which the British government, who will receive the land of Palestine as part of a League of Nations mandate after World War I, makes a promise to the Zionist, World Zionist Organization and says, yes, we will in fact establish a homeland for the Jewish people in Palestine. And then the last point here is the territory was captured in defensive war. Right? So historians will tell you that there have been 4 Arab-Israeli wars. There's been an Arab-Israeli war 1947-48, right, before the start of, or before the creation of the new state, the formalized creation. That there is obviously the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, right, which is ultimately won in about 9 months by the Israelis. There is the Six-Day War that occurs in 1967, and then there is the Yom Kippur War in 73. And I think what that last point is the argument that whatever land Israel is holding on to right now was won as part of a defensive war and a victory in those wars. All right? And the one thing that all those wars have in common, maybe if you take the first one, the Civil War, out of the mix, certainly the last 3 is, in the view of the Israeli people, they were attacked initially by the Arab world. That it was the Arab world that initiated those 3 conflicts. And therefore, any land that was captured as part of a defensive war. So we'll examine those issues. All right, so if that's the Jewish claim to the land, what's the Arab claim to the land? Arab claims to Palestine, okay? So in the 6th century, Islam is established by the Prophet Muhammad, all right, 636. Muhammad unites the tribes of Arabia into a religious caliphate, and a caliphate is simply a religious government or a government run by religious leaders. Muhammad and his successors extended this caliphate into a vast empire through jihad or holy war. And then the Muslims conquer Palestine, and then that is, should say conquered, not conjured, conquered Palestine in 636 CE, okay? So those are the 2 competing arguments. And realistically, from a historical perspective, nothing has changed with regards to those arguments. Right? Both sides, if they were sitting here today, and we were having this conversation, we'll make the argument that that is why they rightfully possess or should possess the land of Palestine and or Israel. And we'll talk about the differentiation as we go through. Right? Who are the Palestinians? This is a great question, right? Because I'm not sure everybody has a hit. We hear the term, but do we really understand who they are? An Arab ethno-nationalist group residing primarily in the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, Israel, Jordan, and parts of southern Lebanon and Syria. So they are Arab Muslims. 13 million world population. The vast majority are Sunni Muslim, all right? Though a significant minority are Christian. So there are Christian Palestinians in this territory as well. Today, Palestinians make up about 20% of the Israeli population. And that changes periodically depending on what territory Israel is in control of. So, you know, a few years back, Israel got out of the Sinai. Israel had possessed the Sinai for a significant period of time. Israel moved itself out of the Sinai, basically, you know, turned it back over. So that percentage is going to change. But that's the argument now. As of 2019, 5.6 million Palestinians were considered refugees by the UN. All right? And here's the interesting statement, I think, that will kind of put this into some type of context for you. The Arab world considers the Palestinians the Jews of the Arab world, okay? In terms of their dispossession, at least from the argument made by the Arab world, and that it has been difficult in diaspora for the Palestinians to find any type of assimilation. All right? They have been moved to different places throughout the Middle East. A lot of times they have been accepted reluctantly by those Middle Eastern states, and assimilation has been difficult. And just as the Jews found that situation at the end of the 19th century, from a political standpoint at least, and make the argument that the only way of survival is the right of return to their homeland, the Palestinians now make that argument, that the only way the Palestinians can survive is to return home. Now, we could make this a real short seminar, because all we would have to do is say, well, our basic problem here is that the Israelis see Israel as the only place that they can survive, and so do the Arabs. But it's the same place. Hence, why we have a seminar tonight. So that's where we're at. Very quickly here, Ottoman rule over Palestine. The Ottoman Turks ruled Palestine for about 600 years, okay? Muslim Turks, at the outset, an estimated 1,000 Jewish families lived in that territory of Palestine. Jews and Christians were considered dhimmis, which is simply the argument that they were second-class citizens. And again, another interesting concept, I believe. It was not uncommon that Jews in this 600-year period did better under their Arab occupiers or rulers than they did under their Christian rulers, okay? They were treated as second-class citizens, Christians and Jews, but basically, as long as they kind of stayed in their own territory, their own areas, right, and paid their taxes, which were higher than an Arab Muslim citizen would pay, pretty much they were left alone. Now, there are periods where there's going to be pogroms against them by Arab rulers, there's no doubt. But for the most part, they were kind of left alone. And there were even periods of time, especially in Spain, which is considered the golden age of Spain, in which Jews played a key role in that Catholic monarchy or set of monarchies. They were the chief advisors. They were the bankers. They were the diplomats in many respects. And so they were treated pretty honorably in that setting. So it's just something to keep in mind. By the 18th century, Jews were fleeing to the Middle East to escape European persecution. This is the anti-Judaism that we've referenced numerous times here, coming out of the Catholic Church in Europe. Okay? Jews as Christ killers. The deicide argument. Okay? And so Jews are making a conscious decision to leave Europe and go to the Middle East, figuring they'll get a better shot in the Middle East. By the way, please stop me, because I'll just keep going. So if anybody wants to throw a comment in, talk, please stop me and say whatever you want to say, other than Hunter, who is not allowed to say anything. All right, Hunter, you just sit there. All right, here we go. All right, so this is a map, and if I had to do the presentation over again, I would have put it there first, because it gives us a pretty good idea of the territories that we're going to talk about, okay? So if you disregard the writing for this moment, if you look at a map of modern-day Israel, the modern-day Middle East, you can see the disputed territories. The West Bank, which borders Jordan, right, and then rolls down to the Red Sea, right, is one of those areas that is always up for grabs or being fought over, okay? It's where Jerusalem lies, and it has been controlled, occupied, right, by different groups, Israelis, Jordanians, right, over the last, since Israel is created, right, and it's still a point of controversy. The Golan Heights at the top there is another disputed territory that was taken by Israel, right, in the 1967 war and occupied. The Gaza Strip, which is probably the most explosive area in Israel at this point in time. There are 1.5 to 2 million Palestinians in that very, very restricted area. All right, that area has traditionally been governed by the Egyptians. It's where Hamas, the terrorist group, works out of. And a couple times a year at least, you will read about Hamas attacking from the Gaza Strip, Israel sending rockets into the Gaza Strip in retaliation, okay? And the area that says Egypt, right next to Israel there, would be the area known as the Sinai Peninsula, okay? Another territory that is constantly being fought over, or has been historically, right? Life in Palestine under Ottoman rule, part of the Ottoman Syria, small, 200 miles long, 50 miles wide. If you look at the West Bank, and you look at that area, the orange area there, and it goes to the Mediterranean Sea, that stretch of land is 9 miles wide. That's it. Okay? It's 9 miles wide, and depending on who's in the West Bank and who's controlling it, that 9 miles is a very, very provocative 9 miles, because that's Israeli territory to the sea. So, again, we'll come back to it. First Aliyah, 1880 to 1900, 30,000 Jews immigrate to Palestine. Aliyah, right, the movement of Jews into the Palestinian area, or Palestine or Israel. By 1914, Jews owned 130,000 acres of land, funded by Zionist organizations and the French benefactor Baron de Rothschild. So you've heard the name. Right? One of the things that anti-Semites love to do is throw the Rothschild name around as a member of or a founding father of the New World Order, okay? The protocols love that idea of Rothschild as being the financier of the international Jewish conspiracy that they love to talk about. So it's interesting that this is where that comes from, that he did, in fact, help a lot of these Jewish immigrants make their move into Palestine. Second Aliyah ends 1914 at the start of World War I. At that point, 85,000 Jews living in Palestine, 1/9 of the population. The writing is probably tough here, but I'll read it to you. The Zionist movement, and again, a lot of us, I know because I've seen you at a number of our things, a lot of us are very familiar with this. That is a picture of Theodor Herzl. Herzl was the Austrian Jewish newspaperman, impacted significantly by the anti-Semitic pogroms of the late 19th century in Russia, in the other Eastern European nation states. Certainly the Dreyfus Affair plays a role in his decision to write the book, Der Judenstaat, the Jewish State, and he is considered the founder of the World Zionist Movement, okay? And again, I think it's important to understand, at least in some type of shorthand way, not shorthanded, but shorthand, what Zionism is. Zionism, and this is going to be an oversimplification, but I think it works for our purposes here. Zionism is the idea that Jews will never be able to fully assimilate in the diaspora, right, in other nations, that they will never be able to fully be accepted, and that ultimately the only possibility for the long-term survival of the Jewish people is to return to Israel. Right? It's the right of return. And that's basically the argument that the Zionists are making. And Herzl gets a lot of that credit as the founder of that movement. Okay? The Haskalah movement, which is the Jewish Enlightenment, urges Jews to assimilate into Western culture. Herzl is the one pushing back against that idea, saying that's never going to work. And that's where that is. Okay. Arab displacement and rising nationalism. Rising Jewish immigration, so we just looked at the aliyahs. Rising Jewish immigration leads to increased displacement of Arab felon. Right? That term simply means villager or farmer. Who wants to talk? Oh. Hang on. Go ahead. I'll repeat it. I don't want to run away here so these guys lose.
That word, the term Zionism, has it changed over the years to today? And also there are some very, very famous Zionists, like Hannah Arendt, who went from Zionism to become anti-Zionism.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, that's another more than 3-hour seminar, I think, but I think the early stages of Zionism is the right of return idea, that we have to go home, that there's no other choice, that the world has made it pretty clear that there's no other choice. This is the only place we can survive. I think that's the early Zionist movement. Today, if you fast forward 100 and whatever it is, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. It's much more of a loaded term because the critics are going to use it as a pejorative of Zionists acting as occupiers now, acting as the bullies of the Middle East. And there's listen, I think the Jewish community is split on that argument. There are a number of people in the Jewish community that would basically regard themselves as anti-Zionists. There are a number of people in the Jewish community who advocate for a two-state solution. It's part of the political drama that goes on in Israel all the time. It's why a guy like Netanyahu comes in and out of power frequently, because he has a very defined position on the relation with the Arab world, what should happen, and he has others in the more liberal political parties in Israel who are making the argument that long term, we've got to solve this thing. So I don't know if that answered it. Yes, ma'am.
Wasn't it originally a two-state solution?
Yes, yeah, we're going to get to that. Yes, originally it was. That was the UN plan. Yeah, we're going to definitely get to that. Because, again, it's the Arabs that reject that idea. And now, ironically, it's the Arabs who would love to go back to that idea. But circumstances change, okay? Last point here is really important. Some Arabs come to believe that if the Jews conquer Palestine, they would weaken the cause of pan-Arabism. So pan-Arabism, Danny, what's pan-Arabism? Every Arab country is, right, the unification of the Arab world under a single government, pan-Arabism, right? So that movement, which is gaining steam during the World War I time period, is threatened by increased Jewish immigration, okay? And that's going to be, you know, the argument here on why you want to limit that. The Grand Mufti, is appointed by the British in 1918 to lead the Muslim community in Palestine. This is his statement, and it kind of summarizes the things we just went through. If this country is the cradle of the Jews spiritually, or spirituality, and the birthplace of their history, then the Arabs have another undeniable right to Palestine, which is that they propagated their language and culture in it. All right, hang on a second. The Jews' right had died with the passage of time. Our right is alive and unshakable. So basically, his argument is this. Yeah, you were there first, but you haven't been there for a long time. And possession is 9/10 of the law. So we've been here. We've been the culture, the dominant culture. We cut our teeth here as a culture. And so that's our claim to this. Okay? You have a religious claim to it, but we have a realistic cultural claim to it, and we're not going anywhere. And that's really where that is. Any better or no? Okay, it's all right. There's only a few like this. All right, World War I. Palestine hit hard by the war. In addition to destruction caused by the fighting, the population was devastated by famine, epidemics, and Ottoman punitive measures against Arab nationalists. There's a significant Arab rebellion against the Ottoman government during World War I. Okay? Any of you who have ever seen, what's the Lawrence of Arabia movie called? Is it Lawrence of Arabia? Lawrence of Arabia. It's a little before my time, so there's not a whole lot anymore that's before my time, but that's actually one of those things that is a little bit, but I'm a big Peter O'Toole guy, so I should be able to reference it. Anyway, this is the Lawrence of Arabia story. The British trying to influence the Arabs in these nation states who are occupied by the Ottoman Empire to fight against the Ottomans. The Ottomans were obviously fighting against the British in World War I, and this is Lawrence of Arabia's story. This is, hey, fight with us, we'll grant you your independence when this thing's over. Well, they do fight with the British. There is a significant Arab nation rebellion against the Ottomans. Except, surprisingly enough, when the war ends, Great Britain decides they're not granting independence to anybody. They're going to take control, along with France, of as much of the Middle East as they can. And this is going to be, you know, one of the real early alienations of the Arab world against the West. So when we talk about a lot in class, why do they hate us? This is step one on why they hate us, okay? That's the argument. Major battles take place in Gaza before Jerusalem is captured. The remaining area was occupied by the British in October of 1918. So the British occupy Palestine at the end of the war, and then we get to the Balfour Declaration, which we talked about a little bit earlier, okay? The British promised the support of the British government to create a Jewish homeland in Palestine. British saw the Zionists as a potential ally capable of safeguarding British imperial interest in the region. So think about this reality, and this is a little bit more inside baseball stuff, but I think it's really, really important, okay? If you look at that argument, what this tells you is that in 1917, the British knew exactly what they were going to do, which is they were going to dominate as much of the Middle East as they could, okay? Their vision, along with the French, along with most Western Europeans, was the Arabs will not be able to govern themselves. They're not ready for this. We have the opportunity to take control of this region. And if we create a Jewish state here, they will help us hold on to this region. They will become an ally. They'll owe us, and they will become an ally against the Arab world, who will obviously push back against this. So I think that's important. The belief that support for a Jewish homeland in Palestine would mobilize America's influential Jewish community to support U.S. intervention in World War I. Remember, we don't get into World War I until 1917. So that war's being fought for 3 years, okay? The British are dying for the United States to come into the war. The idea here is promise the Jews a homeland. Influential, wealthy Jews in the United States will put political pressure on Woodrow Wilson to get into the war, to make that happen. Right? I mean, from a political standpoint, it's not a bad thought. It makes sense. It also, in the belief of the British, would sway Jewish Bolsheviks to keep Russia in the war, okay? So there's that historical, kind of stereotypical connection to Bolshevism, communism, and the Jewish people. And the idea here is, if we create a Jewish state, the Jews in Russia will force the government to stay in the war, not allow Lenin to pull them out of World War I. All right? And I know we're getting a little deeper into this maybe than we should, but I think this stuff's important. Arab response. And this is going to be the beginning of a pretty consistent pattern of the Arabs going, sorry, we're just not buying any of this. Okay? Haifa Conference, Palestine was an autonomous Arab entity. The Arab executive totally rejected any rights of the Jews to Palestine. It doesn't matter what the League of Nations wants to do. It doesn't matter what the British want to do. The Jews have no right to this land. That's the argument. Remained the basic policy of the Palestinian Arabs until 1948, when the new state of Israel is created. Between 23 and 28, the period was relatively quiet. Arab passivity was due in part to a drop in Jewish immigration. So at the end of the war, there is a natural slowdown of Jewish immigration into Palestine. Things have settled down. People have made the decision. They're either staying home, trying to get into the United States, okay, other places. So it slows a little bit, and the Arabs kind of calm down a little bit, all right? Tensions rise up again in 1929, and this is something that a lot of you will probably be familiar with. The British Mandate for Palestine, okay? Basically, the League of Nations hands Palestine to the British after the war and says, you mind it, you govern it, you control it, okay? You take whatever profits you can take, but you're in charge of Palestine. You are the governing entity in Palestine until further notice, okay? And basically, what they say to the British and then to the French in Lebanon and other places in that part of the world for their mandates will basically be, it's up to you, Great Britain, it's up to you, France, to decide when the Arabs are going to be ready to govern themselves. Okay, so you hand it to the British, you give them control of the territory, and you say, you decide when they're ready. That's the mandate, okay? In Palestine, the mandate required Britain to honor the Balfour Declaration. All right, so again, that's significant. All right, so you're going to take it over, but you got to do what we promised the Jewish people, which is you have to work to establish a Jewish homeland. And this is where all hell breaks loose at the end of this decade. And again, I'm sure some of you folks are familiar with the Wailing Wall riots. The Wailing Wall, which is obviously in Jerusalem, is a holy site for both the Jewish people and the Arab Muslim people. The wall itself, the Wailing Wall itself, is a remnant of the Second Temple, so it's all that's left of the Second Temple. So it's an extremely holy site for the Jews. The Muslims believe that the Wailing Wall was part of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which makes it an incredibly holy site for the Muslims, okay? And basically, in 1928, the British make a decision and say, the Wailing Wall and that region belongs to the Arabs. It belongs to the Palestinians, okay? Which allows the Palestinians to restrict access to the wall. So, I mean, we could spend days on this, right? But basically what happens is, this occurs in 6 days in August. On August 14th, there's a situation which a 17-year-old Sephardic Jewish kid out playing with his buddies, kicks a football into the yard of an Arab family. A young Arab girl picks up the football. There's a confrontation on, is she going to give it back? Is she not going to give it back? It's our football. No, it's your football. And ultimately, the young Jewish kid gets stabbed to death, okay, by a group of Arabs. He dies 3 days later, all right? On the day he dies, 6,000 Jews march on the Wailing Wall as a symbol, okay? The British come in to try to put down the rebellion and the anticipated pushback by the Arabs, and you get the Wailing Wall riot, all right? In 6 days of rioting, 133 Jews, 116 Arabs are killed, hundreds are wounded. 17 Jewish communities were evacuated, okay? 174 Arabs and 109 Jews were charged with murder or attempted murder by the British, all right? So, if you're getting anything out of this, try to understand that the British are starting to wake up to the fact that this gig that they have in Palestine may not be as easy as they think it's going to be, okay? It's pretty clear that the British anticipated that the Arabs were going to be relatively meek, completely unorganized, not really willing to create too much havoc, that they would buy them off with whatever they needed to and run the show. Right? 1929, the Wailing Wall riot, and the things that are going to happen after that are going to let the British know that maybe they bit off a little more than they can chew here. But it's going to take them another close to 20 years to get out. So we'll go from there. Does anybody want to, I mean, this is really becoming like a straight lecture. I know that's not supposed to be what it is. Anybody want to talk, comment, ask a question? Am I losing you? No? Yeah, I know, but I could just mail you the PowerPoint. You can read it. You guys are, I mean, were you all right here? Okay, because I mean, I don't want to bore you. Yes, sir. Good. Thank God. Go ahead. Sure.
Did the Arabs, so they were there, I guess, I think you said something like, because they were there,
Right.
that was part of their claim.
Mm-hmm.
But in the Quran or something, did they claim that they had any kind of, divine?
Over Palestine?
Yeah.
No.
Divine, okay.
No.
No divine, okay.
No. I mean, basically, the Ottomans just occupied as much territory as they could. Yes, sir.
There was a pre-1100s claim because that's where they believe Prophet Muhammad ascended into heaven.
Correct. At the Wailing Wall, actually. Right. There is a, you're right, there is a tie there. Right. Right. They believe that site, the Wailing Wall, is where Muhammad tied his donkey and then was taken into heaven. Yes. But I mean, there's not the initial religious claim like the Jews had. It's down the road a little bit, yeah. Hunter. No. It was an actual football. No, I think it was two kids who got into a conversation and said, I mean, was the Arab young lady that picked up the ball unhappy that there were a group of Jewish kids coming into her yard? Probably. Yeah, I mean, yeah, they weren't, digging each other. It was, but, I mean, that's not a bad question, though. It's actually a good question. All right, we okay on the Wailing Wall? We're good? Great job, Hunter. All right, so what should we know? And this is actually a good place to break. Maybe it's a little early yet. Yeah, we can go a little longer. All right, what should we know? Political Zionists like Herzl made the case for Jewish statehood decades before the mass murder of European Jewry took place. So decades before the Holocaust. There is the argument and the push towards the creation of a Jewish state. So I think that's important to understand. Zionism was a response to 19th century nationalism and anti-Semitism, as well as the Jewish Enlightenment and the emancipation of the Jews. Okay? 2, the Zionist movement had spent many years actively building in Palestine the economic and political infrastructure for an eventual Jewish state. So there are Jews in Palestine at an increasing number throughout the early 1900s, okay? And they are there for the specific reason of looking to create a Jewish homeland. That is in their sights. It's not an accident that they're there. That's why they're there. 3, Zionists did not need the Holocaust to convince them of the Jews' existential need for statehood. We just talked about that. Jewish ties to the land of Israel predate the Holocaust by thousands of years. For 2,000 years, Jewish prayers have expressed the dream to return to Zion. Okay? So, again, what we're trying to make the argument here is that the Holocaust does not create the state of Israel. Okay? It's going to aid it in certain ways, but it's not going to create it. Okay? Almost every historian is going to make the argument that sooner or later, there was going to be a Jewish homeland. Did the Holocaust speed it up? Possibly. Probably. And we'll get to that. But that's the argument. Okay. All right, so the 30s. Hitler comes to power. More Jews start to try to leave, right, as Hitler's persecution becomes more and more prevalent. Right? By 1935, Arab political parties collectively demand that Jewish immigration cease. So the Arabs now see what's coming. Right? They see more and more European Jews trying to get out. Okay? They know that Palestine's going to be a place that more and more Jews are going to try to get into. And so they're going to put pressure on the British, who, remember, are now in control of Palestine, to shut down immigration. Okay? And they're going to use terrorist tactics to make their point when the British don't respond appropriately. A boycott of Zionist and British goods was proclaimed by 1936. The Jewish population of Palestine reaches nearly 400,000. So if you go back to the slide a couple slides ago, we said after the second Aliyah, there's about 85,000 Jews in Palestine. You know, in 20 years, you're at 400,000, okay? And you're now 1/3 of the total population. Right, so if you're an Arab Muslim, right, you can see the writing on the wall here. I mean, it's coming. And somebody is going to have to figure out how this works itself out. Okay? You're coming from 1929 with the Wailing Wall riots. Things don't calm down. That tension is going to be escalated throughout that period. And now one out of every 3 people in Palestine is now Jewish. And the only thing that's going to happen is more and more Jews are coming in. All right? There's no more Arabs coming in. The Arab population is what the Arab population is in that land. They're not coming in. But the Jews are going to continue to come in. And the Arabs are in a panic. And they're going to make the British pay for that paranoia. This is interesting only because, and again, I know this is really kind of stuff that maybe you're not as familiar with, but this is actually somewhat controversial in the Jewish community because it's really a collaboration between the Zionists and the Nazis, right? And it's not the only collaboration. I mean, we're going to see others. So what is it? It's an agreement between the Nazis and the Zionist Federation of Germany that enables Jews fleeing Nazi persecution to transfer some portion of their assets to British mandatory Palestine. So rather than read the entire thing, let me see if I can explain it to you in like layman's terms. Okay? This is a deal in which the Nazis and the Zionists go, look, we Zionists will be more than happy to get out of here. But the British are blocking our entrance into Palestine. We're going to need some help here from the Nazi government. You want us out? We want to go. How do we get this done? How do we get a visa? How do we get out of here? Well, here's what you do. You send all your income, or a vast majority of your income, send it to Palestine, okay? You then move to Palestine, and then you're going to use that income that you sent to Palestine to buy German-made products to establish your new home, your new territory, your new farmland, whatever, okay? So that's the deal with the devil that the Zionists attempt to make. I understand what's going on. I'm sending all my money to Palestine. It's going in a German-owned bank in Palestine. When I get to Palestine, I'm going to buy Jewish-made products. German-made products for my home, for my farm, for my schools that I'm building, for my hospitals that I'm building. So the Germans benefit doubly in this situation. They get rid of the Jews, who they want out anyway, and they use Jewish money to buy German products. The German export situation had struggled in the 30s as more and more nations start to use sanctions against them. They're looking for a way to increase their exports. This is a pretty good way. The issue becomes the Zionists appeared to be in league with the Nazis here. So who do I trust here, Hunter? No. The Zionist movement? No, the Zionist movement's a political movement, all right, that's really looking to try to open up a pathway for the Jewish people to return home. Not white supremacy. No. Sure. Oh, in that respect, yes, absolutely. Yes, there are Jews that are anti-Zionist, yes. Well, we're talking now in that argument is anti-Jew or anti-Zionist Jews. Not so much here. Although there are people that disagree with the Zionist movement here too. This is not going to be good for the Zionists, though. Yes?
I was going to ask, how did this work out for them?
They got more people in the Palestine, and the Germans made a lot of money. I mean, it only works for a short period of time. A couple of years, and then it gets shut down. All right, but it does. Listen, if you're a Jew and you got to get out of town, absolutely. Like, are you willing to make the deal with the devil? Well, you lose all their argument was you're not losing anything. You're going to have to buy a bed, a kitchen table, a tractor for your farm. You might as well buy it from us.
Were the Jews, their fellow Jews, did they consider them like traitors?
We're going to get into that when we get to the second part, when we talk about the conflict with survivors and the Sabra, when we get to that territory. So let's hold on that. But this is, you can see the controversy here, right? That, how principled can I afford to be in this setting? Should I, as a Jew in Germany, have said, well, I'm not dealing with you guys. I'll stay here and die. Or I tell you, look, here's how you get your 8 and 9-year-old kid out of here with a shot at a life. Am I buying a German-made product? You're damn right I'm buying a German-made product. I would. Maybe that makes me less moral than others, but if that's my kid and I can get him out, I'm getting him out. Maybe. But it is controversial. Hi. Right.
Boycott any products coming out of Germany to hurt the German company.
Sure.
And so you have a strong split in the Jewish community, very strong split.
Right.
Over this issue of to what degree in any way are you going to support this government?
Sure. But the Germans got hurt by that boycott, which is really their motivation for forcing the Jews to use their assets to buy German products. They were trying to make up.
This is the reaction.
Absolutely. They're trying to make up their export losses that the boycott is forcing. So, it's really interesting. These things are all tied together. Yes, ma'am.
Now, citizens bought into this?
I mean, there's probably, I don't know, 1,000, 1,500 maybe families that, it's a small number. All right? But again, understand what happens here. There's only 500,000 Jews in Germany at this time. That's less than 1% of their population. By 36, 37, this is 33, half of them are out. The other half wind up staying. And this gets shut down.
That's it. And then they shut it down. So, and these other stories that you're familiar with, so when you get into the, like, why did the United States not allow the St. Louis to come into the United States? Because they were at their quota. And there was no political upside to letting more Jews into the United States. And Roosevelt, a liberal Democrat, knew that the Republicans would crush him if he arbitrarily waives the number and allows more Jews in, and that there wouldn't have been a lot of political support for that movement.
Why would the Republicans rush him?
Because he would be arbitrarily going above the limit that Congress had passed the law, immigration.
Were they anti-Semite?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, but not just that.
Oh, so-
Not just that. I mean, there are plenty of Democratic anti-Semites too. FDR wasn't exactly a progressive with Jews, by the way. I mean, not really. And they voted for him. I mean, they loved loved FDR. And yet FDR's argument was, well, I can't make this a war about the Jews, World War II. Can't do it. Why? There's no political support for that. I'll get crushed. And he probably would have. He probably would have. But that's where that is. Okay. Our buddy, Eichmann in Palestine. Eichmann is a young SS officer, meets secretly with a Jewish militia group, the Haganah, in Berlin to discuss the possibility of deporting German Jews to Palestine. So this is another attempt to get the Jews out. Disguised as a journalist, he lands in Haifa, spends one day in the country, and determines that the economic situation of the Jews was dire and would not support mass immigration. So this is almost like an F Troop. If for those of you folks that are old enough to remember F Troop, does anybody remember F Troop? Sir, you don't remember F Troop. There's no chance you know. Yeah. F Troop. You don't remember F Troop? You remember F Troop? Where they were cowboys, they were cavalry, they were all screwed up, and they screwed everything up. This is kind of like that. Eichmann gets on a plane, and he's disguised as a journalist, and and he flies to Palestine, and they won't let him in, and they stop his passport, and he sneaks around Haifa for a day, and basically the Jewish communities he looks at are not exactly flourishing at that point. So he comes back and he says, look, this plan will never work. We won't be able to push all these Jews into Israel. They'll never take them. They can't support them economically. Okay? But it's an interesting story. Eichmann's an interesting guy, to say the least. This is the Arab revolt, the killing of a Palestinian militant leader at the hands of British police ignites the first sustained violent uprising of Palestinian Arabs in more than a century. By 1937, an Arab peasant-led resistance target is that the Jews will go hard after the British as we get a little bit closer to the end of World War II. Right? British crushed the rebellions with 20,000 troops, killing more than 2,000 Palestinians. Forces the exile of the Grand Mufti to Lebanon. Okay? So the Palestinians have had enough of British rule at this point. They're really unhappy with the number of Jews still coming in. They really want to shut down. And ultimately,
We all right? We want to break here?
Yeah. Here, it's not actually a bad time to.
So what year are you guys, what's your name?
First prophecy, he's teaching them.
Aiden, yeah.
Yeah.
It's the single one with the thing on the back. Hold this. Stand over.
Test 1, 2. It worked.
All right, folks, if you're still eating, please take your time, stay right where you're at. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to try to start again, but there's no problem with any place you're at, or if you're continuing to finish dinner, that's absolutely no problem. All right, go ahead. Okay. All right, so where we left off, I think, was this situation, and again, in the interest of time, I'm going to put the slides up, and then you can read what interests you, and I'll try to give you kind of a quicker synopsis. This is a really significant document that is issued by the British government, again, while they're still in control of the mandate of Palestine. And this is called the British White Paper, and what it does is it significantly limits Jewish immigration. So this is a clear response to the Arab uprisings that really intensify in the mid-1930s. That is Neville Chamberlain. Yeah, Neville is the great appeaser. Yeah, it really doesn't work out well for Neville. None of it really works out that well for Neville. But yes, Chamberlain was obviously the British Prime Minister at the time. And so this is a direct response to that Arab terrorism, the Arab nation, or the Arab population in Palestine, pushing the British government to stop or limit, at least, Jewish immigration. It limits immigration to Palestine to 75,000 over the next 5 years. Thereafter, Jewish immigration would be subject to Arab acquiescence, all right, meaning the Arabs would have to sign off on the number of Jews who would be allowed into Palestine from that point on. All right, so you can anticipate, it says at the bottom there, this is the end of the Anglo-Zionist Entente. So we said the British were hopeful that an ultimate Jewish state in the Middle East would be an ally. Obviously, that's going to change dramatically as a result of the White Paper. And this is what you'll see. You're going to get the birth of these Zionist underground groups. Now, Haganah, which is the oldest kind of rebel underground group, had been around since 1920 to protect Jewish settlements from Arab attacks. In reaction to the White Paper, build up Palmach, an elite strike force, organized illegal Jewish immigration to Palestine. 100,000 Jews in over 100 ships were brought to Palestine in what was known as the Aliyah Bet. The Aliyah Bet is basically the secret smuggling of Jews illegally into Palestine based on the limitations of the White Paper. So this is the Jewish reaction, the Israeli reaction to the White Paper. Offshoots of Haganah, you get the Irgun, all right, led by a name that you're going to recognize, Menachem Begin, who the British absolutely believed was a complete terrorist. He was Yasser Arafat to the British. He was that guy. Leader of this group, Irgun, committed acts of terrorism and assassination against the British, who they saw as illegal occupiers, violently anti-Arab. Violent activities led to the execution of many members of the Irgun by the British. In retaliation, the Irgun executed British Army hostages, and in a moment we'll look at maybe the most infamous situation, which is called the Sergeant's Affair in Israel, that the Irgun is a major player in. The Lahai also known as the Stern Gang. That is a picture of the founder, Abraham Stern. Stern comes out of Haganah, creates a more militant rebel group, anti-British, believed that Great Britain was the greater threat to a Jewish homeland, and invites aid from the Axis powers during World War II. Stern actually negotiates with the Nazis a little bit, trying to entice the Nazis to aid and run the British out of Palestine, which is an interesting fact. This group famously assassinates Lord Moyne, the highest-ranking British official in the Middle East, in 1944. And the reason that I'm giving you these things is so that you can get a sense of the building pressure on the British. First, it was the Arabs who attacked them consistently from the mid-30s on in an attempt to persuade them to stop Jewish immigration. And then as the British accede to those wishes and do stop British immigration into Palestine, now you're getting these militant Jewish rebellion groups who are pushing back using terrorist activities against the British. So the British are in an absolute no-win by the mid-1940s. Two famous events here in terms of Jewish rebellion against the British. The 1946 King David Hotel bombing. All right? So the British, in the run-up to this, engaged in what was called Black Sabbath by the Jewish people, and that was a raid on Jewish communities in an attempt to arrest rebel leaders. Okay? The response to that is that there will be an attack on the King David Hotel by the Irgun. And that rebel group will. The King David Hotel was in Jerusalem. It was basically the headquarters of the British military in Jerusalem. So there were a large number of military officers there, high-ranking officers, etc. The inside story on this, I think, is interesting. The Irgun plants the bombs to blow up the hotel and then makes 3 phone calls, one to the hotel itself, one to the French embassy, and then one to a Jewish newspaper, Arab newspaper in Jerusalem, basically telling them that there is a bomb planted, it's going to go off at a certain period of time, in an attempt ultimately to get the British to evacuate the people out of the hotel. The British, for whatever reason, ignore all 3 warnings. And ultimately what happens is the bomb goes off. It kills 91 people, wounds hundreds, deadliest attack on British personnel in the Mandate era, instrumental in Great Britain's decision to get out of Palestine. All right, again, so just add one more thing on this decision of the British to get out. There you can see other attacks on the British, the dates. Again, we could do a whole seminar on the rebel activity against British rule. This is the one I wanted to talk about, the Sergeant's Affair. Is anybody familiar with this, or anybody heard of this one? Sergeant's Affair? So it says, after 3 Irgun members are sentenced to death at Accra prison, right, in Jerusalem, the Irgun tries to save them by kidnapping 2 British sergeants. Right? And those individuals were named Clifford Martin and Mervyn Price. All right, so you've got 3 convicted Irgun rebels awaiting the death penalty, awaiting their death sentence. The Irgun captures these 2 British sergeants and basically says, we'll make a prisoner swap or a prisoner exchange. On July 29, 1947, the 3 Irgun prisoners are hanged. So the British ignore the hostage request or the hostage exchange. They go ahead and execute the 3 condemned men. 13 hours later, the British captives, the 2 sergeants, are hanged. Their bodies are booby-trapped and hung in the woods outside of Netanya. Highly influential, again, in the British decision to leave Palestine. This, to me, is, the bombing of the King David Hotel is going to kill 91 people. But there's an argument that says, yes, they were looking to make a statement, and the statement was going to be the destruction of property, and they did attempt to issue warnings to the British to get out, okay? Don't be there. This, to me, seems much more of a line in the sand. This is, to me, the situation that says whatever has to be done to accomplish this goal, to rid this land of the British, we are going to be willing to do it. And it gets enormous international attention, and it's really at this point where the British go, okay, enough is enough. We can't do this any longer. We got to get out of here. And that's really what happens here. You also get this, a story that you are probably familiar with, Exodus 1947. The Exodus was an old passenger ship, 4,500 people from the camps, all right, the DP camps, leave France for Palestine. The British block their entrance into Palestine, okay? When the ship goes back to France, the passengers refuse to disembark. French authorities refuse to remove them, so you've got a standoff, 24-day hunger strike on this ship until the British take them to Hamburg, Germany, and place them in British detention camps. PR nightmare for Great Britain, okay? So add those 3 things up, the King David, the Sergeant's Affair, the Exodus, and you've got a pretty good indication of how this is going to end. British look to get out, all right? In 1947, the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine recommends the termination of the British mandate for Palestine. That's a good recommendation, but they didn't have a lot of choice. The British basically went to them and said, we're leaving. You figure it out, but we're not going to be able to stay here. We're not going to keep getting blown up here. So we're out. And here's your question. This is the UN Assembly resolution. It's arguably the most significant, well, I don't know if it's the most significant, but it's pretty damn significant. And that's Resolution 181, okay? And that's the vote, 33-13-10 abstentions, to terminate the mandate and partition Palestine into a Jewish and Arab state. The British announced the termination of their mandate effective May 15th, 1948. All right? This map is the original UN plan that was laid out, okay, if you look at it. 2 states, the yellow areas there were set up to be the Arab states, okay? The orange regions were set up to be the Jewish states, okay? If you look at that territory, the Jewish state gets about 55% of the territory. The Arabs get 45%. But a large portion of that Jewish territory is in the southern part of the nation, which is desert. It's the Negev desert. So did they get a little bit more? Yeah, they got a little bit more, right? But it was not exactly the choice territory for farmers. Remember, this is before the Suez Canal is built. This is before these advances in irrigation are going to allow the desert to be irrigated. So, yeah, they got a little bit more territory, right? But it's not great. The Zionist organization that is running this situation for the Jews in Palestine immediately accept the plan. Yes, we're good. 2 states, we're in. Show us the map, we're in. The Arab nations universally reject, have no interest in a 2-state solution. Okay? So now what you're going to get is the British are total lame ducks. They've already told, this is 1947, this is November of 1947. In 6 months, they're out of there. They're leaving. Yes, sir.
My question is something I've never really studied a whole lot of, to be honest, is how much effort, how much thought was put into making Jerusalem that international secular...
It's kind of what their argument is, especially after the Wailing Wall riots, and the argument was so much of there's no way either side's going to concede on this. And we'll just take it. I think if you read about it, I think there was an idea that says at some point we will work this out, or somebody will naturally come to control this territory, and then we'll deal with that then. But that would have been a sticking point, clearly. So I think it looks like almost the quickest political way to get to a 2-state settlement. Now, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter because the Arabs are not interested in it anyway. But it's interesting that the Jewish people were okay with this plan. And again, remember this map, because the Arabs now would die to go back to this plan. It's a very strange map. It is all broken up. So what you get is an attempt by the UN to not have to move more people than was absolutely necessary. So what they did was they looked at the spot and said, well, where are the Jewish settlements right now? Remember, 33%, maybe a little more at this point, are Jews. So they have this, they're not 50% yet of the population, but it's getting closer and closer to 50%. So basically what they said was, all right, look, where are the Jewish settlements? Where are the Arab settlements? And then tried to kind of work around that, knowing that there would be no perfect way to do this. That inevitably, some Arabs are going to be in Jewish territory, some Jews are going to be in Arab territory, and I think they tried to do the best they could. And when I do this in my class with the kids look at the map and they go, why didn't they just divide it in half? And I go, well, that's a really good question, except it's not going to work that way. I go, well, that'll never work. That's my kids. Go, that'll never work. I'm like, well, because they're very prescient. That it would never work. You are correct. It did not work. All right, but it was a shot. So where are we? So this is what you get. And I think it's important, and you don't have to go through all this, but you can get an idea just by briefly looking at it. You're going to get a civil war now for the next 6 months. The British have announced they're leaving. They're getting out. Okay? And you know what happened, and I don't want to trying to avoid politically insensitive statements here, but I will inevitably stumble into one, so we're just going to go for it. If you think about the situation in Afghanistan when the Biden administration announced that he was withdrawing, he was getting out, and then set a date and said, we'll be out by this date. Well, that message is not missed by the Taliban in Afghanistan. All right? They understand all I got to do here is wait this out. And really, their heart's not in it, and they're withdrawing people, and we're not going to wait. All right? That's exactly what happens here. The British have already announced they're leaving. They're packing up their stuff. All right? And you've got now the Arabs and the Jews in a civil war. And historically, this is really regarded as kind of the first Arab-Israeli war, is this civil war. Right? The second one will be the one that will occur just after this in 48. But you can see, and it goes back and forth. The Arabs blow somebody up, the Jews blow somebody up, and it was just that type of guerrilla conflict in Palestine. So no one is completely clean in this matter, and that's what you got. This is the famous picture of David Ben-Gurion signing the Declaration of Israeli Independence. This is the nation of Israel, May 14th, 1948. David Ben-Gurion, who will become the first prime minister of Israel, was the leader of the World Zionist Organization. That's why he's the signer on this declaration. And this is day one of the state of Israel. Okay? Massive parades, massive celebrations. And think about that reality. I mean, how long the Jewish people have been without a home, have been in diaspora, have been persecuted. We haven't even talked about the reality of World War II, but I mean, we certainly know what that is. And for them to now have a home is incredible to me. It's just, I'm not sure we can relate to that. But that's what happens then, and so what happens there. Let's look at this before we go to the war. And this is really, what impact did the Holocaust have? So Israel becomes a state in May of 48. What's the impact of the Holocaust? This is what I think it is. So you tell me, and this is where we could probably have some really good discussions. The Holocaust motivates a large number of immigrants to move to the new country, providing the necessary population. Over 325,000 Jews from Nazi-occupied Europe came to Israel between 48 and 51. So you had 400,000 Jews there already, and now you're adding in the next 3 or 4 year period another 325,000 people. All right? That's obviously, you're almost doubling your population. So that's significant. The Holocaust enabled Israel to pressure Germany into supplying the economic base to build infrastructure and support those immigrants. And this is something that's rarely talked about, but it's the reparations idea, okay? The Jewish victims of the Holocaust demand reparations from the new German government, the West German government. And again, we're pretty clear on this idea of the division between East Germany and West Germany. So the West German government is going to ultimately settle. And if you look at it, it's called the Luxembourg Treaty. Between 1953 and 64, the negotiations go on. And at the end of the day, it's about $800 million in American money. Okay? That is a huge shot in the arm, obviously, for a new nation state. So that is a direct impact from the Holocaust, is the reparations. Okay? That money comes as a direct result of the Holocaust. The Holocaust swayed world opinion so that the UN approved the State of Israel in 1948. This is one of those strange realities, especially in the early stages of the Cold War, where Russia and the United States immediately accept the idea of a State of Israel and immediately recognize the State of Israel. Hugely significant in 1948, in the early stages of the Cold War. And the idea here is the Holocaust sways a lot of that opinion, okay? And the last one here, most Jews in the diaspora who had previously been opposed to Zionism or largely indifferent to it, this is the conversation we just had, were convinced of the need for Jewish statehood after the Holocaust. And, sir, what's your first name? Buddy. Buddy just told me before he showed this slide, that his parents were avowed anti-Zionists prior to the creation of or the actual formal realization of the State of Israel, and then almost immediately turned completely around and supported it. Now, part of the reason for that is going to be I think. All right, so we didn't even go into this. All right, so I'm going to jump ahead, Harry, if you don't mind, okay? At the end of the war, just to look at some numbers, in the second half of 1945, 90,000 Jewish refugees came to Palestine from Europe. All had lived under Nazi occupation. Some had been in concentration camps. In the next 3 years, you can see the number of survivors. This is specifically talking about survivors, okay? 60,000 survivors come in 1948, the first year of statehood. 200,000 more arrived. There were 350,000 Holocaust survivors in Israel by the end of 1949, 1/3 of the total Jewish population. Okay? Many survivors faced a difficult struggle. The new state did not encourage individual soul searching. This is where I'd like to spend the last, well, we only have 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes. But this is where I'd like to spend the last 20 minutes, is kind of a comparison between the reality of the group called the Sabra, okay, the people that were already in Israel or born in Israel, okay, and the survivors, because there's a very significant difference here. Survivors were expected to put aside the past and become part of the group, okay? So let's look at that if you don't mind. A strange wall. That's Ben-Gurion, all right? The general opinion of the yeshiv, the people that were already there, not European survivors, people who had already been in Israel. The general opinion of the yeshiv was that the human quality of the native Israelis was higher than that of the immigrants. That it was the natives that were making the Israeli revolution, not the immigrants. So it's basically the argument. The Holocaust didn't create Israel. We created Israel. We are responsible for Israel. I mean, that's a very clear point. The perception was, as Ben-Gurion said, there was a strange wall between Holocaust survivors and the native Israelis. Ben-Gurion called it a barrier of blood and silence and agony and loneliness. Okay? Let's jump. Sabanin or Saban, and some of you may have heard this situation. Sabanin is Hebrew for, anybody speak Hebrew besides Harry? Harry, you speak Hebrew? Nobody? So I could tell you it means anything and you'll have no idea, right? No, I'm just kidding. Google, no. Sabanin is Hebrew for coward. Saban is Hebrew for soap. Sabanin sounds a lot like Saban. So here's the argument. The Sabra, who were the people who were born and lived in Israel, not the Holocaust survivors, were not interested in accounts of Jewish suffering. And this is the survivor by the name of Yoel Palgi. Everywhere I turned, the question was fired at me. Why did I not rebel? Why did the Jews go like lambs to the slaughter? Suddenly I realized that we were ashamed of those who were tortured and shot and burned. There is a kind of general agreement that the Holocaust dead were worthless people. Have we not ourselves put the 6 million on trial? That's really pretty deep stuff. I mean, that's, now again, that is one man's perception of the reality for survivors in the yeshiv. It's pretty deep. Let's push. I should have cut this in half and we could have spent more time on it. Author Yehudit Hendel on Israeli TV. This is a fairly famous Israeli TV personality, author. To put it bluntly, she is, by the way, a Sabra. She was born in Israel, as not a survivor, an original Sabra. And I'll tell you what Sabra means in a minute. To put it bluntly, there were almost two races in this country. I grew up in a workers' neighborhood near Haifa, and there was, we can certainly say, an inferior race. People we saw as inferior who had some kind of flaw, some kind of hunchback. And these were the people who came after the war. She's talking about the survivors. I was taught in school that the ugliest, basest thing is not the exile, but the Jew who came from there. That's pretty tough stuff. I mean, that's pretty tough stuff. Let me go back because I missed one that I wanted to get to here. This is one you may be familiar with, maybe not, maybe you've heard this. This is an incredible story. This is called the 81st Blow. Has anybody heard this? All right, so this gentleman, interestingly, is in this picture, he is a Israeli policeman, and that photo was taken at the Eichmann trial. The gentleman's name is Michael Goodman, okay? Michael Goodman was in a concentration camp in Poland. He was 17 years old, and due to some infraction that occurs to Michael Goodman, he is hauled in front of the commandant, and he is whipped, and he takes 80 strikes from the whip by the commandant. And when he is done with this whipping, 17-year-old kid, his back is, you can imagine, his back is torn up, it's bloodied, the skin is basically gone. He can just about walk. He spends weeks in the camp hospital. And then the war ends and he gets out and he comes to Israel as a survivor. But the story, the 81st Blow story, is that when he tells people the story of what happened to him in the concentration camp, they basically don't believe it. They don't believe the story. And Goodman's argument is that is the 81st blow. The fact that they just didn't buy it. Or if not, they at least really didn't want to hear it. That in their world, the Sabra, and again, I don't know how I missed these slides, because I'm not very good on this thing, that's why. But Sabra and survivors. Anybody know what a Sabra is?
It's a native-born Israeli.
Well, it is a native-born Israeli, but what's the literal term of a Sabra? Correct. It's like a prickly pear that grows in the desert. And the argument is it's really tough and hard on the surface, but it's really sweet inside. When you break it open, it's really sweet inside. And that is how people in Israel, the Yeshiv, the original people from Israel, people born and raised in Israel, kind of view themselves. And this character is a character by the name of Shrulik. He is used to portray kind of the native Israeli, not the European survivor that comes over, but the native. It's almost like an example like our Uncle Sam would be as representing the United States. This gentleman, Shrulik, is designed to kind of represent the native Israeli. So just something to think about here. Did I miss one? We did that. The 81st one, we did. Okay, so here's the turning point, and here's how we can end this, and I'll give you, we'll certainly have some time for comments. A turning point. Ben-Gurion says, something was required to unite Israeli society. Some collective experience, one that would be gripping, purifying, patriotic, a national catharsis. And what that becomes is the Eichmann trial. When Eichmann is brought to Israel and tried, And that testimony, which is broadcast obviously all over the world, and those survivor witnesses give their testimony, it changes the mindset a little bit of the Sabra, the people who were born there, okay? And it's a cleansing, it's an ending, it's a way to put a period on that, on the Holocaust. It's cathartic is what it is. This is 1961, Eichmann. This is the Eichmann trial in, and again, you know the story. Eichmann is, the SS officer who is captured in Argentina by Israeli secret, the Israeli intelligence group, brought back, tried in Israel for war crimes, and ultimately hanged. This is for me just this is my this is the part of the Holocaust stuff that my kids find as fascinating almost as anything else, and that is the examination of this case. And I know Lois is a big fan of Arendt, and that book is one that I continuously reread, and it's a tough read. It's not an easy read. I used to have my kids read it, and I talked to Harry, and he said, they'll never be able to absorb all that, and they can't. It's way too in-depth. But if you ever are looking for something to read, if you have not read Eichmann in Jerusalem by Arendt, Hannah Arendt, it's an absolutely stunning piece of writing, I think. Now, she's controversial. She's not for everybody. She's tough. She's a tough lady. And she takes some really unpopular stands. But it's a brilliant piece of writing. I think you can decide what you want. But if you haven't read it, it is a classic in the genre. I mean, you've got to look at it. Eichmann in Jerusalem, a report on the banality of evil is the subtitle, where she kind of steals that phrase and makes the argument that the thing about Eichmann was he was not anything special, that he was not a monster. He was so average that you would never even look at him twice. Yes, that's what makes him as scary as he is. Because Eichmann's not a monster. I mean, he's really not. I mean, not in our definition of, I don't think, not in our definition of a monster. He absolutely did monstrous things. But her argument is, if you look at Adolf Eichmann, if you look at him, he looks like, no, is there any accountants here? Nobody's an accountant? Good. All right, good. That's good. Sorry if anybody online is an accountant. He looks like an accountant. It's funny, we had a math teacher here a couple of years ago. He looked just like Adolf Eichmann. Tommy DeLuca looks just like Adolf Eichmann. Looks just like him. I never told him that, but that's who he looked like. But he was relatively small. He's not physically imposing. He's not, he's not a raving lunatic. He's none of those things. I don't know if I would have ever looked at Adolf Hitler a second time. Would you? He's kind of a dumpy, bad mustache. Yeah, it's not a great mustache, but all right, yeah, I wonder how much of that we bring to it on our own. You know what I mean? And maybe, like if you look at Mao Zedong, he killed millions and millions of people. Does he look like a threat to you? He's like Sorry.
You're making the argument, or she's making the argument that anyone is capable of.
Absolutely. I always start my class with a quote from Thomas Merton. Merton was a mystic, Catholic priest, writing a lot in the 60s, very anti-war pacifist. But Merton's quote, which I start the class with every year, my Holocaust class, is, He says, basically, if we think of the Nazis as monsters, as this unbelievable, once-in-a-lifetime, group of people, we're basically doing ourselves a disservice. Because his argument is that it's regular people that commit these acts. I mean, if you look at Eichmann's background, he was a vacuum cleaner salesman. That's what he was. Eichmann was a high school dropout, sold vacuum cleaners house to house, and joins the SS because his father basically told him, hey, dude, you better go get a job. I don't know if he said, hey, dude, but, whatever German for hey, dude is, he basically said, go get a job. He goes, where do you want me to go? He goes, talk to the SS guy. They seem to be doing all right. He went in, signed up. He spoke a little Yiddish. They made him the head of the Jewish office. And that's how he becomes Adolf Eichmann.
I find it interesting, too, that most of the Nazi elite didn't meet the Aryan ideal physically.
No, there's some. So you'll get Reinhard Heydrich, and you'll get some of those guys. Yeah, and a lot of the junior officers, they kind of moved junior officers up. No, not the elite, no. They absolutely didn't. I mean, a lot of it is a charade, but anyway. Absolutely, and Harry, that's another, have we ever done that? Nazi mysticism? Wow, that would be a, well, see Harry. See Harry on your way out, he'll punch your ticket. That a guy. Yo, I'm sorry, does anybody want to, we're pushing 7, so I know Harry is adamant on getting us down at 7. Would anybody like to have a comment, a question, anything? Ma'am?
Today, with the Arabs, there's a lot of Arabs that were Israeli citizens.
Yes. There are Arabs who, and in fact, the Israelis do grant them full citizenship rights. They have the right to vote. They have the right to any type of social welfare that is, distributed in Israel. So, I mean, I think the issue there is the Jerusalem is a huge issue still. How you ultimately resolve that. The refugee camps in the West Bank, not the refugee camps, the Jewish settlements in the West Bank are a huge issue. Gaza is always a problematic area. And the Israelis have kind of turned that over to the Palestinians and allowed Hamas to run that. But Hamas is, an extremely violent organization that is, the goal of Hamas is to drive Israel into the sea. They're not contemplating a two-state solution. They want the Israelis out. And, so to give them that territory, you're accepting the idea that it's not going to be good. Anybody else? I'm sorry.
This has been extremely enlightening for me. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. I enjoyed doing it. My pleasure. I hope you got something out of it. Folks, before I turn it over to Larry, thank you very much for coming. I hope you don't have to do that. I hope you got something out of it. If anybody would like, a reading list or anything like that, if you shoot me an email at school, I'd be happy to give you what we do with our kids. There's some great stuff on there, and I know Harry's always got a ton of stuff. So thank you again.
Let's thank Tony for, again, a very wonderful presentation, an interesting presentation about this subject. Again, we're going to try to get out on time. Just to be aware, our next activity is going to be on April the 20th. That'll be a virtual presentation. It'll be Seth Stern talking about his new book, which is Speaking Yiddish to Chickens. Look for that advertisement and sign up and register for that workshop, which is coming up. After that, actually a presentation, and then April 27th, we'll do this another workshop, a second part of what I did last month, dealing with the subject of Holocaust education. So there'll be other activities also that you'll see. Hopefully you're finding coalition activities to be interesting. I thank you for coming to these events and coming out and supporting it. Again, if any of you are interested in making a volunteer contribution, see Margie right over there. And again, I thank you very much, and have yourself a good evening. Hey. It should be yes. Yes. Yes.